What's up guys, Xell here, and today we're going to be talking about the new kid on the block. No, not you. Ugh. Talking about Uta. Uta is the latest leader released in the West with the release of Starter Deck 11. And we know this leader is going to be around for some time and relevant for some time as it recently took down a Japanese championship, which is really cool. I think Uta is a very strong deck and I wanted to talk about how it works, so let's get into it. So first, let's look at the Uta Leader. Uta is a 5k 5 life leader, and she reads, Don X1 when attacking once per turn, reveal one card from the top of your deck and add up to one film type card to your hand. Then place the rest at the bottom of your deck. So she wants as many film cards in the deck as possible because her ability lets you draw those cards. The general strategy is to go wide with your film cards and then beat them down at the end game with big beaters like Dofi or the 8-cost kid or the Uta related events. Let's talk about some of the core cards to the deck. First up, we have Nami. Nami is a 3-cost 5k. On play and when attacking, you may pay 1 Dawn. Look at the top 3 of your deck, reveal up to 1 film card other than Nami and add it to your hand. Then place the rest at the bottom of your deck in any order. This card does absolutely everything and is kind of the glue that holds the whole deck together because it's an efficient body at a 3-cost 5k. And then on top of that, it draws you cards, so it makes it so that it's impossible for you to run out of gas. Basically, this card is a kill on sight for your opponents, and if they don't, the game's over for them. Luckily for your opponents, this card is pretty easy to remove, but that's totally fine because Nami gives you immediate value anyways. Next, we have Brook and Luffy. Both of these cards have an on-play effect that allow you to play an additional film card when you play them. And really, these abilities are the reason why you're able to efficiently spam the board anyways. Next up, I want to talk about the Uta Leader locked events that are super important for ending the game. So first up, we have Backlight. Backlight is a 2-cost event. Main, if your leader is Uta, choose one of the following. Rest up to one of your opponent's characters with a cost of 5 or less, or KO up to one of your opponent's rested characters with a cost of 5 or less. This card's just extremely efficient at removing your opponent's cards, and on top of that, when you're going for game, it also gets these pesky blockers out of your way. And resting a 5 cost basically means it hits every relevant blocker in the game outside of now Luffy. Next up, we have I'm Invincible. This is a 3-cost event, main, set up to one of your Uta leader as active. Now, when I said earlier that this is the new kid on the block, I meant that literally, because this is basically the card that lets you cosplay as Green Kid for a hot second. And we all know how strong Green Kid's ability is. And Uta being able to have that on just a card is really powerful. This enables you to finish the game because you can put an absurd amount of Dawn onto your leader and then swing twice, which is insane value. This is the deck list that I've been running in 5.5 with Uta, and I will say that my list is pretty greedy. I'm running a lot of non-film cards, so it's pretty expected to whiff on your leader quite a bit. So it's one of those things that it's up to you and your kind of risk tolerance at what you want to do, but I just find that I like having the heavy late game in a lot of my games. So if you wanted to tinker with my deck list, here are some of the cards that I would play around with. 1, Zoro is a great card, and I think he's really good in this meta because I think 6k attacks are really powerful. He can be cheated out with Luffy, which is another bonus to him. And so if you want more film cards in the deck, I would look at putting more Zoros in. Another alternative is Frankie. Frankie is just a generic vanilla, and he's just a big boy, and he just gets in there and does work. That said, he can't be cheated out by anything, so I find him to be a little bit awkward, but that said, you really can't go wrong with putting Frankie in the deck. To make room for some of these cards, I would maybe reduce some of the top-end cards like the 8-cost kid and Dofi. I think both of those cards have their place in certain matchups, like 8-cost kid makes yellow's life miserable. Like, that card is just so powerful, especially because nowadays people are running less 8-cost Katakuri, so they have less options of dealing with the 8-cost kid. It's just such an annoying card for them. Versus 10-cost Dofi, who I think is just kind of generically good, but I think he's particularly a menace against like Sakazuki because his on-play effect just prevents Sakazuki from attacking, which means that they have less ways of dealing with your stuff. Like, I just think 10-cost Dofi is just a very generically powerful card, but again, not searchable, so it's something that you can reduce if you feel like it. I'm also running 2 of the Bartolomeos. The card's very expensive. I just happen to be lucky to open 2 of them with my championship packs. So I'm running 2. I think that card is very good, don't get me wrong, but completely expendable if you feel like it. Next, I want to talk about matchups against the popular decks in OP05 and just talking about my experiences through these matchups. Now, I will say I kind of hate talking about matchups in a generic way like this because I think that matchups in One Piece are very context-based, and there are a lot of decisions that can make things better or worse for you. And so I just want to say, do your own research, experiment a little bit, and see what works for you. So first, let's talk about the Purple Luffy matchup. I think this matchup is slightly unfavored for Uta, but I do think that the matchup is close. So while Purple Luffy generally dislikes decks like Red Green Law, Zoro, Bello Betty because they go wide so fast against you. However, Uta does go wide, but just not as fast as those decks, and that makes all the difference. It allows Purple Luffy to have more time dealing with your threats, and their kind of mid-range strategy generally does better into Uta and answers Uta's cards a little bit more effectively. That said, Uta also has a bunch of answers for Purple Luffy in the backlights, resting basically every 5-cost blocker in Purple Luffy's deck. 7-cost Luffy also doesn't get popped by Kaido, and then in general, the 8-cost Kid can be problematic as well if they don't have their Kaido. So I think that this is one of those matchups where either deck can definitely win, but I generally think that Purple Luffy's answers are a little bit more clean against Uta. Next, I want to talk about the yellow decks. Let's talk about Katakuri. I think this is actually one of Uta's better matchups, kind of like Green Film Kid. You just kind of overwhelm Katakuri, and by the time they get to 10-cost Big Mom, you want them to basically be dead. The other thing you can do when they're about to play 10-cost Big Mom is stick a 8-cost Kid down and rest him, and basically, if they don't have big cards on the board already, they basically have to give up their entire turn to play the Big Mom, and by that point you might already be in a position to win. And so I think this matchup is pretty favored. I think this is a deck that just generally Katakuri will struggle against. Next, let's talk about Enel. I think compared to Katakuri, Enel is a much tougher matchup for Uta. The goal for Uta here is to kill Enel in the least amount of attacks as possible, and so you generally don't want to just blindly swing away at Enel, because the worst thing that can happen is Enel answers all your cards on board, and suddenly you only have one attack left, and they're at that Enel zone, like I like to call it, where they're at 1 life and you don't have enough cards to attack their life and go for lethal. So I think this is one of those matchups that, again, you play the long game and just try to build up a big board and try to kill Enel slowly with the least amount of attacks as possible. Unlike Enel, who has a hard time finding their late game cards, Uta has the ability to constantly filter through the deck and try to find those, Luffy's or whatever to help you end the game. So I think that this matchup still is favored to Uta, but it's pretty close. And of course, there's Sakazuki. I think this matchup is slightly losing for Uta. However, again, I think this is a pretty close matchup. So Uta's board spam can't actually outpace Sakazuki's ability to, remove everything like Sakazuki wants to do. However, the goal here is to board spam to the point where Sakazuki is forced to use a bunch of resources dealing with your board that by the time you get to your late game, Sakazuki is gassed out. And this is where Uta can win the game. This is also one of the matchups where I'm Invincible gets to shine the most. Who cares if you don't have characters? If you're just swinging big with your leader all the time, they have to enforce things with their blockers, and all their blockers can be rested with backlight anyways, so I think this matchup is actually pretty close, but definitely Sakazuki favored. So lastly, I want to talk about some tips and tricks that I've picked up when learning to play Uta. First, definitely conserve your counters a little bit in the early game, because late game, you're going to need them. You run a lot of bricks on the deck with the 4-cost Luffy. Basically, your entire late game is all bricks, and you run a lot of events. So you have to definitely watch out for that. On top of that, if you're running the 8-cost Kid, you're going to want a lot of those counters to defend the kids, as of course your opponent is going to try to attack into him. So you just have to be prepared for that. You have 5 life, so use it. Tip number 2 is to time your new Genesises. New Genocide? Now, it's tempting to play New Genesis as soon as you draw it, because the card is essentially free because it unrests the Dawn that you use to play it. However, I find that it's better to time it. 1, because it hides information from your opponent, and 2 is that if you over search with the deck, you're going to inevitably send your late game down into the bottom of the deck, and so you want to make sure that you're giving yourself the opportunity to draw into the cards that are your late game, because none of them are film. Tip number 3 is using your 7-cost Luffy as an attacker. Now, it's tempting because he's such a big blocker that you just want to use him defensively. However, the 7k attacks that he brings are monstrous, and they put so much pressure on your opponent. And on top of that, you have ways to unrest him at the end of turn using your Uta blockers or just using a Bartolomeo. So definitely be on the aggressive with your 7-cost Luffy. Okay, and that's it for my Uta deck profile. I hope this was helpful, and hopefully you get those dubs using the deck. I think the leader is super fun, and I hope you guys enjoy playing it. And anyways, that's going to be it for me. Thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!